To make an animated button, I started by just drawing a box, just a simple box right here with no stroke, just to fill, gave it smooth corners. And then I made a button symbol out of it. In fact, I'll break that apart and do that step again just to be complete here. So I just drew a box that I want to be my button. I'm hitting F8, or I could use the interface, one of the multitudes of ways to create a new symbol. I'm going to make sure it's a button symbol. I'm actually going to set the registration point in the center rather than the upper left. It doesn't really matter, but I typically keep it in the center unless I'm importing graphics into like a movie clip, then I'll put it in the upper left. Making sure it's a button, and you can give it a name. Maybe I'll call it my button, right? It doesn't really matter. But what I've showed you before is you create a button and you go inside of this button symbol. And now we've got our different button states, up, over, down, and hit. I've showed you all of this. So I'm going to hit F5 over here to add frame so I can actually get to all of my button states. So if I were to just change this very simply to put a keyframe on the over, maybe I want it to turn from blue to pink when I roll over it. And then maybe when I'm actually pressing down, it'll go from pink to this like orangey salmon color, right? So you've seen this before. So if I were to publish this, there's my button. I roll over it, it turns pink. I press it, it turns that orange color, right? So no matter what you use, whether it's just graphics, you could import images, you can do whatever you want and just stick them on these keyframes. And up is what it looks like default. Over is what it looks like when the user rolls over it. Down what it looks like when the user actually presses it. And then hit represents the clickable area of the button. So if it's a shape big like this, we don't have to put something in the hit area. But before I've showed you guys, if it's a text, for example, it's a good idea to put a shape behind the text in the hit area so you don't have to click on the actual glyph of the letter. So this should all be reviewed. We've seen all this before, how to set up these different button states. Let me get rid of these for a moment. Now what you want to know is how can we actually animate this? Now a cool little trick is we can actually, even though we're inside of a button now, we can actually put movie clips on any one of these states, on the up state, the over state, or the down state. Now, if we use a movie clip, then it has an entire timeline of whatever's going on, and that timeline is just going to continuously loop. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and just put it on the up state right now. So I'm inside of my button. I'm on the up state. What you have to decide when you want to add animation to your button is you want to decide, where do I want it to animate? Do I want it just to be animating default, or do I want it to animate when the user rolls over, or do I want it to animate when the user presses it? So whichever one, you want to put a movie clip on that actual keyframe. In fact, you can put different movie clips and different animations on each keyframe if you want. But I'll step through each one and show you how it works. So if I were to create a movie clip out of this now, and this is where this is nesting symbols. Nesting symbols means putting symbols inside of each other. And that can get a little confusing, but it's also extremely powerful once you start to wrap your mind around what you can do with it. So right now we started with a box and we made a symbol of it. And now that I went inside the button, now I just have this box, right? It's not a button inside the button, it's just the box. It's the original thing I drew. Well, now I'm going to make a movie clip out of this. So even though I'm inside of the button, I can still select my whole box that's sitting on the up level, and I can make a new symbol. This time I'm going to call it a movie clip, and maybe I'll call it my button animation. Sure. All right, so now I have this movie clip. All right, now just because I made it a movie clip, it doesn't work any differently. So right now I have no over, no down state. I just have this movie clip on my up state. So if I run it in the browser, nothing's happening, just works as you would typically expect. Okay, but now if we animate something inside of this movie clip, so now I'm going to go inside the movie clip. So now I'm 3 levels deep, right? So at the very beginning on scene 1, I have this button I created. So I double click to go inside of the button. Now I see my button states. I see my button breadcrumb trail right here. And then I have a movie clip sitting there. So now if I want to go inside my movie clip, I double click that, and now I'm 3 levels deep. From scene 1, I went inside my button, and then I went inside my button animation that's sitting on that state. So from here, now I can go ahead and just make an animation. And whatever animation I do inside of this movie clip is going to play automatically on my button. So let's make a simple animation. I'm not going to tween anything yet. We'll tween something in a moment because that will require us to create yet another symbol to make a graphic symbol. But if we're not tweening anything, we don't have to make graphic symbols. So I could, in theory, just, let's say I want this to be 10 frames long. I'm going to give myself some time out here. This gives me 1/3 of a second to deal with. And let's say within this 1/3 of a second, I want this to change into a bunch of colors. Maybe I'll do it like every other frame. So I'm going to set keyframes every other frame here. So it'll blink, but it won't blink super fast. It'll only blink like hyper fast. All right, and now that I have keyframes, now I can go in and on each keyframe, I'm going to go ahead and just pick a random color. Moving along, picking random colors. There we go. So now I have this movie clip with a timeline that if I were to play it, it's just going to be blinking through these colors. All right, now because this is a timeline that's just going to consistently loop, it's just going to play through this and just keep looping over and over and over again. Well, the key is knowing that you are allowed to put a movie clip on an actual button state. So now we have an entire timeline of animation that's happening on our actual up state. So in theory, if I test this, I should see that animation happening to my button before I ever do anything to it. And there it is. So we have this amazing psychedelic button now on our up state, just sitting there doing all of its things. So let's say I wanted that animation to only happen if I roll over it. So now, instead of having that movie clip on the up frame, maybe I'll put a keyframe on over, which holds the movie clip, and then I'll go back to my up frame. Now I'm going to break apart the movie clip to make it not a movie clip anymore. So I'm just going to modify break apart. Now it's back to being just a shape. So I have just my plain old ordinary shape on my up state, but now I have my movie clip named my button animation on my over state. I could double click in and see all of my little disco graphics there. But now that button is just sitting normal until I roll over it. And now as soon as I roll over it, I see all of that awesome animation going on. So could do the same thing in the down state. So let's say I just drag this over to the down state. So the over does nothing. Up stays like that. The over still stays like that. But as soon as I press it, now I get this psychedelic look as soon as I actually press the button. All right, so the moral of this is that inside of any button, you can actually put a movie clip on any state, and you can animate whatever you want inside of that movie clip. All right, now let me show you if we were to want to make an animation with a tween, what that would mean. So I went inside of this, I dragged it back to my over state, because let's say I've got my button sitting up like this, but let's say when I roll over it, I want it to like scale up and animate scaling up, right? So it kind of is like a little zoom in type thing. I'm on my movie clip that's sitting here. I double click and go inside my movie clip. Now I'm going to get rid of these to start off with. I don't want any of these other colors. Shift F6 got rid of all the keyframes. So let's say for this 1/3 of a second, I just want this box to actually grow. Now, this is a very common place where students will end up with evil tweens, because it feels kind of intuitive, because it just goes back to those 2 golden rules I originally taught you about using animations inside of Animate. But it does not matter what level you're at. You can be at the main scene level if we were trying to animate here, or we could be 3 levels deep like we are here. From the main scene, we're in our button, then we're in our movie clip that's sitting on one of our button states. But regardless of how many levels deep, we could be 10 levels deep if we wanted. But whichever timeline you're actually on and you want to tween on, you must make sure that you cover those 2 golden rules. And those 2 golden rules, again, are number 1, the object that you're animating must be a symbol. And right now, and the other one is it must be on its own layer. It's already on its own layer, but it's not a symbol. So I wouldn't want to just keyframe and start tweening this, because it's going to put automatic evil tweens in the library. Instead, if we're going to animate something, we just want to make a graphic symbol out of it. So we're actually going to end up with all 3 types of symbols completely nested within each other. All right, so we start with, we drew a box and we made a button symbol. So then I went inside the button symbol, left the box on this frame, but then made a keyframe on the overstate and made a movie clip symbol out of that button. So I can, or out of that box, inside the button. So now I can go inside of that. And now I have this box, and because I want to animate it, now I need to make a graphic symbol out of this, you know, no matter where I am, or it's going to give me evil tweens. So I go to make a symbol out of this, make it a graphic symbol, and maybe I'll call this my button graphic. So now I've got my button animation, and then my button graphic. So now that this is a symbol, I can now actually animate this with tweens. I'm going to hit F6 to make a keyframe, right-click in between them to create my classic tween. I'm even going to set my easing out to 100. And then at this frame 10, I'm going to take this and maybe scale it up a little bit. Like that. So now in theory, from my main timeline here, within my button, when I roll over my button, it's going to play whatever in this movie clip. So in this movie clip now, instead of just a bunch of random keyframes that are changing colors, now I actually have a graphic symbol that's being tweened, and it's zooming up like this. So that little zoom animation should happen when I roll over the button. So it's sitting there in its regular state, and now I'm going to roll over the button, and it plays my zoom animation. Now, having it loop may or may not be what you want. In this case, it's kind of chaotic, but it's really like, hey, you're rolling over me, you can click me. But in this case, I actually want it to stop, and you can do whatever you want inside of this movie clip. And whatever this movie clip does, it's what's going to happen on that button state. So I can go in this movie clip, and I could actually put a code layer. Maybe I'll rename this layer box. Maybe I'll put a code layer here. And then I can put a stop command at the end of this animation. I'll put a keyframe on the code layer there in order to hold it. And then open the actions panel, this dot stop. Open close parenthesis, semicolon. So now, when I test this button and I roll over it, it should play this animation, but then stop it at the end. Oops. So run it in the browser, and there we go. Now I have an animated rollover like that. Whoop. And I could, if I wanted, have a different animation on the downstate. I could have 3 separate movie clips. I could have a movie clip that's blinking colors on the upstate. I could have a movie clip that grows when I roll over it on the overstate. And then I could have a movie clip that like fades out or shrinks or does something totally different when I hit the downstate. The important thing to remember is that basically once you create a button, you are just allowed to put movie clips on these states. And then as long as you have a movie clip there, whatever you put inside of it is what's going to animate. All right, and so you can make animated buttons either just while they're sitting there, you can make it animated when the user rolls over it, or you can make it animate when the user actually presses it. I've had students before have little like stars and things shoot off of a button when you press it, so you see this little animation happen. It can be pretty cool. So the process that we did this in, I'm going to show you a different way to kind of stack all those nested symbols, which is the way I would do it. The first way I showed you is kind of more intuitive in the sense of, okay, first we drew a shape and we created a button out of it. and then we went inside of the button, and then we made a movie clip, and then we went inside of the movie clip, and then we made a graphic symbol. So ultimately, we end up with a button with a movie clip inside of it, and then if I wanted to edit this graphic symbol, I have a graphic symbol even inside of that movie clip. So I really end up 4 levels deep to do this. Now, that will totally work, and it will totally work to create the button first, and then go inside of it, and then create a movie clip on whatever keyframe you want inside your button, and then you can go inside of that, and then you can do whatever you want in there. Just make sure if you tween, you need an actual graphic symbol. Now, you can also nest all of those symbols right away, and I'll show you how, if I were to make an animated symbol, I would do it in this way. So I'm gonna just choose a slightly different color here, slightly different. Maybe this is my button now, is this circle, right? So instead of creating the button symbol and then go inside of it, create the movie clip symbol, and then go inside of it and create the graphic symbol, I can nest all of those by just creating all 3 symbols at once on top of each other. And I'll show you what I mean. So the deepest level I know is going to be a graphic symbol. So I can just take this and I'll call this, okay, well, I'll just call it green circle is the name of the graphic. Great. And now I have this green circle graphic. Well, now I'm going to take this green circle graphic and I'm going to nest it inside of a movie clip by just simply hitting F8 again. This time it's a movie clip, and maybe I'll call it green circle MC. Now I've got a movie clip that's holding a graphic inside of it. Now I can once again hit F8 and this time make a button. And maybe I'll call it green circle button. And what I just did is now I have the setup to make an animation all from one single graphic. So now at this top level, I've got a button that I can double click and go into. And on my up state, I've got a movie clip that I can double click and go into. And then on my movie clip, I've got a graphic that I could double click and go into to edit, like that. Or I can just go ahead and animate along on this timeline. So that's just kind of a quicker way to build that symbol hierarchy, is just kind of build them out like that. So if I wanted this to animate, go all the way into my movie clip where I have my graphic symbol. Now, sure, I can add something there, create some, whoops, create some motion. Maybe I'll have it spin around and shrink a little bit. Sure. All right, so now I've got this funky thing that happens. All right, so now it's set up on my up state. So that's what's going to happen no matter what as it's sitting there. It's going to keep looping. But maybe I want that to not happen there. I want it to happen on my over state. I can break my up state apart so it's not the movie clip anymore. It's just the symbol. And now the over state has that. So now that sits there and waits until I roll over it. And now it's sitting here and animating my movie clip. Just like this one will animate when I roll over it. All right, so there's a couple of different ways to handle the same thing. What it really comes down to is being able to wrap your head around nesting symbols inside of symbols, and even now different types of symbols inside of different types of symbols. So what we've done in each of these instances is we've created all 3 types, a graphic, a button, and a movie clip, and we've put them all together to make this effect, right? So one more time, the top level is the button, because that's what we're doing, is making an animated button. Inside of the button, you've got these different button states, and the real crux of the lesson here is that you are allowed to put a movie clip symbol on any of these button states, because these button states don't give you a place to animate, right? There's no frames. So because there's no frames, I can stick a movie clip on any button state, and then I can go inside of it and I can animate whatever I want. If you're just doing frame by frame animation, you don't need a symbol in here, but if you're doing any tweens whatsoever, you need to make sure that you have a graphic symbol that you're actually animating, or it'll try and create them for you. So we have a graphic symbol sitting inside of a movie clip, which is sitting inside of a button. Now that's the way to do it. Once you get used to that, kind of creating a movie clip and sticking it inside of the button, you'll see that animation. You'll see how it's kind of easy to deal with once you kind of set that up. But I do appreciate for sure that it's definitely a mind warp to wrap your head around kind of nesting symbols this way and putting them inside of each other. But it's the same kind of thing I've been talking about with just putting movie clips on your main timeline to create other timelines. This practice of nesting symbols and putting them inside of each other is what gives us all of the power to do some of these things that you can't do without writing complicated code. And once you can kind of wrap your head around nesting symbols inside of each other and doing these types of things, then things can get a little easier.